Boom! Welcome to SportsBit, Friday, June 16th, and we have a special edition of the show for today. Throughout the summer months, we've done a whole bunch of NFL team previews. We're going to put them together by division so you can break it down one division at a time. We're going to start today with the NFC South. Let's roll. NFC South team previews.
Atlanta Falcons. Win total, 9.5. Last year, 11-5 straight up, 10-6 ATS. Mercy, 13-2-1 to the over. Remember, they lost week 1 at home to Tampa. They also lost to the Chargers at home to drop them to 4-3. Then they went 9-2 straight up in their next 11 games. Both losses were tough. That fluky loss at home against the Chiefs, where they had the 2-point try was returned. There was a fake punt for a touchdown in that as well. And then they lost at Philly in the mother of all bad spots, and then they had the Super Bowl loss as well. Mainstream stats, plus 11 turnover margin, 11 giveaways, tied for the Patriots for NFL low, 22 takeaways, that average. But the big story last year, Teddy, was that offense.
Yeah, it sure was. And again, we when we look at the team previews, we always start with what happened last year. And this team was dominant. I remember that Chiefs game. That was insane. Remember, they were up 1 when they went for that 2-point conversion. They were trying to go up 3. Ended up losing by a point as a result of it. But this is a team, only 11 giveaways last year. They had plus 11 in turnovers. That was tied with New England for the NFL low. And they had 22 takeaways, league average. But 11 giveaways, that's not happening this year. Take the over 11. Okay, the offense. 6.7 yards per play. Number 1 in the NFL by a wide margin. 4.6 yards per rush. That's tied for number 4th in the league. 9.2 yards per pass. That's number 1 by a huge margin. Number 2 was a full yard per pass below them. Washington, the Pats were number 3 at 8.1. So they were 1.1 yards per pass better than New England. That number has to go down. 37 sacks allowed a season ago. That's near the league average. But it's the defensive numbers, Pauly, which may well be primed to take a jump in 2017.
Yeah, 92.5 QB rating allowed, below average. 22nd, 34 sacks, right around the average. 4.5 yards per rush allowed, bottom 6 in the NFL. As a result of the Super Bowl loss, they needed a fall guy. The fall guy was Richard Smith, the defensive coordinator. He's out. Manuel's in, who worked with Quinn since Seattle was the secondary coach last year. And look at this. Looky here. The new OC is Sark. Last time we saw this guy in a big spot, he was showing up drunk to work at USC.
Yeah, Sark sure knows how to get himself a job, and a good job with the defending NFC champs. But, they had a defensive coaching shakeup in the offseason. A couple of position coaches got the axe as well. And going in the offseason, most of the talk was, what are you going to do about defense? Now, they are going to have to adjust to life after Kyle Shanahan. And Shanahan last year, prior to the final 20 minutes of the Super Bowl, had one of the best seasons as an offensive coordinator that I've ever seen. He was dialing up the right play over and over and over again. But now, new offense coordinator, new defense coordinator, and, you got a Super Bowl hangover to go with it. Those definitely concerns. It's a team that only turned the ball over 11 times last year, okay? They had all 5 offensive line starters healthy for every regular season game. 80 for 80 in terms of offensive linemen starting. That, too, not likely to be repeated in 2017. But, man, they added some upgrades. They made some nice upgrades on defense. They locked up Desmond Trufant. They bring in Dontari Poe in free agency to shore up that defensive line against the run. They did lose Jonathan Babineau to retirement, but then they went out and drafted defense after all of that.
Got McKinley out of UCLA, also Riley out of LSU, the linebacker. They did that in the first and the third round. What do you think the SOS?
The strength of schedule last year, slightly easier than average. This year, it's noticeably tougher. Top 10 in the NFL in terms of strength of schedule toughness based on this year's season win totals. The NFC South plays the NFC North and the AFC East. Their 2 extra games, they're both tough. They have Dallas and at Seattle. And again, this is a team that did it mostly with offense last year. This year, we've seen Quinn draft his kind of players on defense 2 years in a row. We're talking about a team that went 13-2-0 to the over last year. That ain't happening in 2017.
The Super Bowl loser has a horrible ATS record in week 1, and they're at Chicago laying points. I know the Bears could be a dumpster fire, but that's something to keep in mind as well. It's going to be hard getting over that Super Bowl loss. I think that stays with them for the rest of their lives.
As well it should, because that was about as egregious a meltdown as you'll ever see on the biggest stage that the NFL has to offer.
Gun to your head, first, what do you think? Over, under?
Under. You know, you don't bet Super Bowl losers over, period. You know, you just don't do it.
On to the Saints, 7-9 the last 3 seasons. Their win total is 8. Last year, 7-9 straight up, 11-5, 8. This was under the radar big time. 11-5 ATS, second best only to Patriots. 9-7 to the over, which was 7-9 in 2015. But 1 winning season since the last division title when they were 13-3 in 2011. The defense has been god-awful the last few years. But look at this, 3-7 last year. In games decided by less than a touchdown, they were awesome ATS. And look at the record. ATS is a dog, Teddy.
Well, yeah. I mean, they were 6-0 against the spread as a dog of +3 or higher. They were 7-1 against the spread on the highway. So much for the Superdome, and you can't bet the Saints on the road. You know, you want the Saints against teams they can blow out. You don't want to bet on them against class. All of that, dead wrong last year. And when you're talking about a team that went 7-9 for the 4th time in the last 5 years, and 7 of those 9 losses, not decided by a touchdown or less, they were decided by less than a touchdown, which means 1 more stop or 1 more score, and they could have won every single one of those games. It was a frustrating season for the Saints. It was not a frustrating season for the Saints backers, as you mentioned, under the radar point spread success story.
Mainstream stats, turnovers -3, 21 takeaways, below average, 24 giveaways, above average. Offense, 6.2 yards per play, 3rd in the NFL, 4.3 yards per rush, that's average, 7.8 yards per pass, 5th in the league, and 27 sacks allowed, 6th best despite a league high 472 pass attempts. The defense, garbage, 98.1 QB rating allowed, bottom 5 in the league. 27th with only 30 sacks and 4.1 yards per rush allowed, league average. They have a lot of needs. They need to fix the defense. Now, the news that came down last week, Fairley has a heart condition, could be career-ending, but they had to fix and address this defense. Teddy, what do you think about some of the moves they made? Now, they made some moves on offense, too. They get Ginn from the Panthers, and the big one, they grab Adrian Peterson.
Let's start with taking a look at the stats from last year, all right? The turnovers. They were -3. They were slightly above average in giveaways and slightly below average in takeaways. Nothing significant there. You don't expect a turnaround or a drop-off off the -3. All right, the same place. You have the offense. That was number 3 in the NFL in yards per play and number 5 in the NFL in yards per pass and a decent rushing team. You know, they didn't allow sacks. The offense, better than average. Pretty darn good offense. The defense, well, they were okay against the rush, but it's the same story with the squad. They have not been able to stop the pass. The 98.1 QB rating allowed, bottom 5 in the NFL again. So then you say, all right, well, you just lost your monster in the middle potentially in Nick Fairley. Let's see, your number 1 corner in Delvin Breaux is coming off a season in which he missed 10 games because of leg and shoulder injuries. Sean Payton going into the draft, quote, "We've got to find a pass rusher." And they didn't find one in the draft. They didn't sign one in free agency. So for all the, ooh, we got Adrian Peterson. Ooh, we got Ted Ginn Jr. You know, they still have a lot of issues on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, they do. They also lost Cooks to the Patriots. Bird left as well, and Hightower. I don't know why they signed Te'o, 26 years old. They also get Chase Daniel to back up Breeze.
Well, let me jump in there real quick because Te'o, in my mind, is a great signing. They didn't pay him a lot of money. He's had a bad injury history. This is a first-round pick. He's only 26. And for a team that needs help anywhere they can get it on defense, to bring in a guy like Manti Te'o. And A.J. Klein was another big sign. You know, they got him from the divisional rival Panthers. He's 25 years old. He's coming into his prime. Their linebacking core will be better. Well, the question is, what else going to be better? And then as for Jarius Byrd leaving, you know, any Saints fan will tell you they're glad. You know, hey, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out of town. He made a lot of money from New Orleans and did not contribute very much.
Took Lattimore, first-round quarterback at Ohio State. Also the tackle for Wisconsin. They took Williams as safety out of Utah in the second round as well. You know, all the questions about Brady, when will he slow down? Same thing with Brees, 38 years old. Number 1 last year in completions, attempts, and yards. 70% completion rate was number 2. Top 5 in QB rating again, been in the top 8 every year since 2011. What do you have on the division?
Well, I mean, they shored up the offensive line. They signed AP. There's no reason to think, other than just because he's getting older, that Drew Brees is going to fall off a cliff this season. And again, when you talk about signing Ramczyk from the first rounder at pick number 32 for the tackle out of Wisconsin, I mean, this team had 6 picks in the first 3 rounds. They did get, you know, the pass rusher Trey Hendrickson out of Florida Atlantic at the end of the 3rd round. Maybe he provides something for them. But they had a lot of draft capital. I thought they used it fairly effectively, although the pick of Kamara at the running back, the first pick of the 3rd round, was a head-scratcher for me. When we talk about the strength of schedule, you know, last year was the toughest in division and the 6th toughest in the NFL. This year, it's right around the league average based on this year's season win total. So not particularly tough, not particularly easy. The NFC South plays the AFC East and the NFC North. There are 2 extra games at home to the Redskins and at the LA Rams. Those games work in their favor. But when you look at the schedule over the course of the season, they have a real tough start. Look at the first 3 weeks at Minnesota, the Patriots, then at Carolina. That's not easy. But the big strength, you know, the whole schedule comes down to what happens in December. 4 of their last 5 games against divisional rivals. If they do well in December, they could easily win this division.
Time for the Carolina Panthers. How about this? 2 years ago, 15-1. Now they went 6-10 last year. The win total is 9. 120 to the over. 6-10 straight up last year. Exactly what Atlanta's facing. Everything that went wrong, everything that could go wrong, did go wrong. 2-6 straight up in games decided by a field goal or less, starting from the get-go. Week 1 in Denver when Gano missed the game-winning field goal. 6-9-1 ATS, 7-8-1 to the under, Teddy. It was a wild season.
Yeah, and it was they couldn't win any close games. I mean, we're not talking about games by a touchdown or less. When you lose 6 times by a field goal or less in a single season, coming off a Super Bowl appearance, you know, it was like they kept on getting gut punched, and it didn't end all year long. But we look at their mainstream stats, they weren't that bad. They weren't the last place mainstream stats, Pauly. Take a look.
Turnovers, they were -2. 27 takeaways was top 10. 29 giveaways, bottom 5. Only other teams with as many or more giveaways: Jets, Chargers, Bears, Rams, and Jags. Hideous. All 5-11 or worse. All sit under their season win total as well. The offense, 5.2 yards per play, 4 yards per rush. Those are both slightly below average. 7 yards per pass, and 36 sacks allowed. Your thoughts on the defense?
Well, I mean, the defense had 47 sacks. That was number 2 in the NFL. They had 3.9 yards per rush allowed, top 10 in the NFL in rush defense. But even with the good rush defense and even with the ability to pressure opposing quarterbacks, they still allowed a QB rating of 92. That's slightly below average. So when you talk about all those offensive stats, yards per play, yards per rush, yards per pass, all slightly below average, the QB rating allowed also slightly below average. And all of those slightly belows led to a very disappointing campaign. But it's not a hopeless defense, not by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, when you look what Carolina did in the offseason, yeah, they put a little bit of money in the defense, and they have a new defense coordinator in Steve Wilks. You know, he's been their secondary coach since Ron Rivera got there. He's going to replace Sean McDermott, who's now the Buffalo Bills head coach. But, you know, they had a little bit of upgrade on that secondary, but most of what they did in the offseason was trying to get all those slightly below averages on offense back up to above averages when this offense was elite in Cam Newton's MVP season the year before.
I think they hit it out of the park in the draft. A home run with McCaffrey. He can do it all. And what a weapon, as he was a top 10 pick. They also take Samuel. Ted Ginn goes to New Orleans. Good riddance there. McCaffrey's been killing it in practice so far. Although who knows when Newton's coming back, as he's coming off of shoulder surgery, so they don't expect him till maybe July or August, Teddy.
Yeah, and you know, this was not a good offensive line last year, and Newton took a beating a season ago. He really did. And we're talking about a guy who was the NFL MVP 2 years ago. You know, best QB in the league that season. Last year, what do you have? 90 carries, 359 yards on the ground. That was his lowest total since entering the league. His completion percentage was below 53%. That's almost 7 points lower than it was in 2015. And, of course, he underwent surgery on his throwing shoulder in March. He said that he was playing for more than a month at the end of the season with a tear in his rotator cuff, but he played through it to demonstrate leadership for his teammates. But now you have all of these offensive weapons. You know, you're talking about your number 1 pick, McCaffrey, your number 2 pick, Curtis Samuel, out of Ohio State. They're going to have to spend their time getting ready and learning the offense with Derek Anderson, and then hopefully they'll get a chance to cram with Cam in August.
Yep, back to the draft. McCaffrey was 8th overall. Second round, they took Samuel, the wide receiver out of Ohio State, Morton, the tackle from Western Michigan, also in round 2, and then defensive end Hall from A&M in round 3. Hall can help out. He'll play behind Peppers and Johnson as well. Secondary, they re-signed Teddy Williams. They lost McDermott, as we mentioned, defensive coordinator. Ginn goes to New Orleans, as I mentioned as well. That's about it with some of the moves. What do you have on the schedule?
Well, you know, the schedule is going to be easier than it was last year. Last year, their schedule was somewhat tougher than average. And this year, on paper, based on 2017 win totals, their schedule is slightly easier than average. That being said, boy, they got a rough run in October. 4 roadies in 5 weeks. The only home game a Thursday nighter against Philadelphia. But when you look at this schedule, and all of a sudden you start going through the first month of the season, you know, at San Fran, Buffalo at home, New Orleans at home, the one game at New England, but then Detroit and then Philly at home and Chicago, you say, man, 6-1, 5-2, it's not hard to picture Carolina getting off to a good start and propelling their momentum forward into the back half of the campaign. And the markets are telling us to expect a bounce back from Carolina. A team that won 6 games last year is lined at 9 with juice on the over. I can certainly understand why the markets are enthusiastic about this team heading into the campaign.
We finish out the NFC South. The Buccaneers win total 8. 9-7 last year. 9-7 ATS. 7-8-1 to the under. 3-win improvement after a 6-10 season, and they were 2-14 in 2014. 6-2 back half of the campaign straight up in ATS. The straight up winner went 15-1 ATS in Bucs games last year. Only exception, +7 against Dallas that Monday night game. They lost by 6. Some garbage points in that one. What do you have on the mainstream stats?
Well, I mean, their turnover margin was +2. Nothing to be excited about there. Interesting to note, though, they had a ton of takeaways. They were 3rd in the NFL, 29 takeaways. They were bottom 10 in giveaways with 27, so they were not particularly good at protecting the football. The offensive mainstream numbers, 5.2 yards per play. That was slightly below average. 3.6 yards per rush. They were a lousy rushing team, bottom 5 in the NFL. 7.2 yards per pass. That's right around league average. And they allowed 35 sacks, league average type number. So nothing that stands out from those particular stats. On the defensive side, you know, they had allowed an 88.8 QB rating. That's average. 48 sacks, top 10 in the NFL in getting to opposing quarterbacks, and 4.4 yards per rush allowed. That was slightly better than average. The defense, solid. The offense, solid. Nothing spectacular about this team last year. They workmanlike, kind of put together a strong second half to improve again by 3 wins after improving by 4 wins the previous season. So certainly a team whose arrow is pointed in the right direction.
The defense was nasty and finished really strong in the second half of the season. They drafted O.J. Howard, tight end out of Alabama. They also took Goodwin, the wide receiver out of Penn State. They picked up Deshaun Jackson and more weapons for Winston, who's got to step up, got to prove it. I mean, he really struggled at the end of last year as well. Something else to watch, Aguayo with the Yips, 2nd-round pick. He's fighting for his job in camp with Nick Folk, so we'll see if he's able to hang on, and they might cut bait with him as well.
Yeah, when you talk about a team and you know, pretty clear offseason needs, I mean, they wanted to get as many weapons around Jameis Winston as they could. I mean, the GM, Jason Licht, had a very clear directive. Give our franchise quarterback weapons. So, you had Deshaun Jackson in free agency. Okay, you bring in O.J. Howard as the number 1 pick out of Alabama at the tight end position. Okay, now, all of a sudden, maybe you got some pretty good weapons for a guy, again, you know, he had turnover problems last year. He threw 18 picks, and he had 10 fumbles, lost 6 of them. He felt like he was trying to do a little bit too much. So, we have now Deshaun Jackson and Mike Evans at wideout, plus Goodwin, plus Cameron Braid at tight end, plus O.J. Howard. You know, they got some pretty good pass catchers. The question is, what happens at running back? Because Doug Martin, he stunk last year. 2.9 yards per carry. You know, he's got a one of those PED suspensions that's going in to 2017. They got a guy in a 5th rounder, Jerry McNichols, out of Boise State, who looks like Martin and has kind of the same skill set as Martin. Are we thinking a 5th rounder can take over for a guy who's been a Pro Bowler a couple of times?
Yeah, well, those Boise State guys, they can get it done. Look at the history. Look at Ajayi as well, too, in Miami. I'll trust the Boise State kids. What do you have on the schedule?
Well, I mean, last year they were, in terms of strength of schedule, it was near the league average. This year it's slightly tougher than average. The NFC South plays the 4 teams from the AFC East and the 4 teams from the NFC North. Their 2 extra games, they have the Giants at home and they're at Arizona.
I don't think much of Winston, but it's a pretty good team. What do you think? I'd lean over.
Yeah, this is a division that we like, okay? There's things to like about Carolina. There's things, I'm not bullish on Atlanta, but I don't think Atlanta's going to completely tank. And I certainly look at Tampa Bay as a team that has a lot of upside. You don't like Famous Jameis? I'm a Famous Jameis fan, and if he can solve those turnover problems, get the ball to his weapons, sky's the limit for the Bucs. I mean, this is the type of team, if I'm looking at long shot Super Bowl futures, Tampa fits the mold, although they could go 6-10, but they're live to go a long way this season if things break right for them.
I'm with you. It's a good division. Nothing would surprise me who finishes in last place or who wins it. And I think the Saints have a bounce back year too.
Yeah, I'm with you. 100%.
Hey guys, you've watched it all the way to the end? That means you liked it. Please, can you give us a like, a share, a comment? Heck, you can even call me. Thanks for the feedback. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching SportsBit Betting Insight Today.